Hi, I'm Paul Perdue, and I'm the infrastructure manager.
And I'm Mary Jo Boyd, a legal technologist. You know, back in the day, I remember when they used to put all the invoices that needed to be paid for a firm in various file folders. First week, second week, third week, fourth week, just so they would know when to pay them.
Right. Well, now that they get put into accounts payable, what do we do to keep track of them and when they need to be paid, just like that old Expando file?
Yeah, now there are a couple different reports that we can use to extract that information, know exactly when they are due, and have it right there at our fingertips each month.
Great. Can you show us how that works?
I can. So I like to enter all of my invoices into accounts payable as soon as they arrive. I want to be able to get those inputted. I want them ready to go so I know when they're due and I can pay them accordingly. So once I enter them in, one of the tricks that I use when I'm actually entering the invoice itself is to go ahead and put a date in there, either the invoice date or the due date. I pick one. I usually probably would do the due date, but I make that due date be the Friday before it's due. I pay bills on Fridays, so for our office. So I would put the due date as whatever the Friday is before that particular bill is due, so that when I do my reports, I can say that the due date, I want to see all of the invoices that are due up to that point in time. Then I can do a report that can print that off, and I can see everything that's due with that due date, and it will always be paid on time. So the first step that I do, again, is I like to put in a due date of whatever Friday before it's due. Now that might vary for yours. You may pay bills on different days. You may pay bills right when they're due. You may pay them 2 weeks before they're due. Whatever works for you, but be consistent. So whatever that batch of invoices are that you're going to pay, make sure that they're on that date. Now, you can still have multiple dates, and I'll show you some different ways to do date ranges, but a lot of times that makes it just much simpler. So once I've entered invoices and I have those in there using a certain date, we have two reports that I'm going to show you today. One is the cash requirements report, and the other is the age unpaid invoice report. So the cash requirements is the report that I would do each Friday that I'm going to be doing bills. So when I do the cash requirements report, on the vendor tab, I have some options here that I could choose a vendor range if I wanted to, or even search for them by beginning name and ending name. But I usually don't do that. I leave it wide open because I want to know all of the vendors that I have outstanding invoices for. I don't want to pick and choose. I want to know everything that's due on this Friday, not for certain vendors. But this might come in handy at some point if you did have a particular vendor that maybe you have a lot of checks that you need to write for example, a court. So maybe there's like something that you have and you want to just do it for that vendor. How many checks do I have to write for the, Cook County Municipal Court within a certain date range? That would be a good example of when this would be something that could be very helpful. Otherwise, if you just leave it blank, you're going to get everything, all invoices across the board that are due for a specific range. The Invoice tab gives me the option to choose a bank account. Sometimes we have multiple bank accounts set up in Accounts Payable, and we only want to see the checks the invoices that are due for a certain bank account. Now here's where we come into play with those dates that I talked about. So whether you're using the invoice date or the due date, I can then come in and say, I want all of the invoices that leave this first one open. I want everything through a certain date range. So that way I can get through the Friday before it's due. Now I'm in sample data, so it thinks I'm in 2014, but I can get everything through whatever cutoff date I want. In my case, like I said, every Friday. So every Friday, this date would change to that particular Friday, and I would see all those invoices. Lastly, on the Options tab, there are several different things that you can pick here. I usually prefer to see all the detail. I want the description. You may or may not need the bank account order. If I'm only doing one bank account, you wouldn't necessarily need that. And I also like to print the general ledger information so I know where I'm posting that particular invoice to, just to double check it if I want to. You could print the tabs 3 information if there were any, and you also have the choice of doing summary and also totals only. So there are some options, but this is my usually preferred way: detail, print description, and the general ledger information. Now I'm just going to leave it wide open, and I'm going to print this to show you what this will look like. So we will preview it. And something else that I like, there is a checkbox in customization that you can check so that you can include the beginning and ending balances or a running total on the cash requirements report. And I always make sure I check that box. I'll flip back here in a moment to show you that, because I want to know, what does it think is in my bank account before I pay these invoices? And at the bottom of this report, it will tell me what's going to be left in my bank account after I pay these invoices. So whatever those are, I have 3 bank accounts here. So let's get up to the top bank account. So here we go. We'll get up to this one. So at the bottom of bank account 1, it'll tell me what my net balance will be at the end. So that way I can see, here's what the total is for all the invoices I have listed, and this is what I'll have left after I pay them. And now here's all the information. So I can see right away at my fingertips that I have an invoice date of whatever it is and who I need to pay and how much. So it's a very helpful report. I used to print this when I worked at a law firm and give this to the managing partner. They could review it and they could okay it. I do this now. I give it to my boss, Paul. He reviews it. He tells me what to pay and what not to pay based on what the invoice due dates are. So that is extremely helpful. I also can go in and push these dates out if I needed to. So if I look at something and maybe it had a due date, but it can actually wait another week or whatever, I can actually click on the reference number on the right, and it will take me directly into that invoice, where then I can push that bill out to another date and leave it there. Or I could leave it on that same invoice date so I can get an aging, which we're going to talk about next, to see how old that invoice actually is. So you can make changes to it by just clicking on the reference number from that report. And you could just print this off to have that at your fingertips. So that was the cash requirements report. Now I did tell you that there is a running balance that I like to turn on. So on my customization, underneath my, let's go over here to my general ledger, there is a print bank account balance on the cash requirements report. So under customization on that section, I like to have that checked so I can see that beginning and ending balance after I print the report. So that one is extremely helpful. I use that every single week to pay bills, and that works out very well. Now the aged unpaid invoice report will give me a list of all the invoices that are outstanding, but it will also tell me how old they are. So I can see if some things have been sitting out there that maybe I missed them, or they're getting a little bit farther than they're past the due date, and I want to just make sure nothing falls through the cracks. I want to see how old these invoices are that I have out there. So the aged unpaid invoice report gives me the same kind of options with my vendor. I can select a certain vendor, or I can just leave this blank. It also gives me the same information here, so I can do it for just one bank account. I'm going to do it for just bank account number 1. And again, I could select a date range if I preferred, or leave it open to get everything. In this instance, I probably want to see everything just to see how old all the invoices are. But again, if you have a certain vendor that you have a lot of invoices under and you just want to see how old all the invoices are for that particular court or medical provider or whatever that is, you could restrict your information there. On the options, I can select whether or not I want to include all of the invoices that maybe I put on hold, or the ones that I need to pay, or both. And you also can do the detail summary or totals only. I can sort it by bank account order, or I can start each vendor on a new page. So there's some different things there. I'm just going to do the detail for a moment. We'll just look at those. And so here I have my clerk of the county court, and there are 3 invoices. And then the aging periods, based on what you've set up in your customization, will show up here. This is older than 29 days. This is 15 to 28 days, 8 to 14, 0 to 7. This is not due yet. This is back the other way. So this is prior to. So this will just give me the list of all these invoices and when they are actually, how old they are since I put them in and when they're due. So here's the test. I can see that's -1 to 7. And then I've got one that's about 7 days old, 0 to 7. Now a lot of those are 0 to 7 on this particular report. Here's another one that's not quite that old. And it will always give me my totals at the bottom for each of those different aging periods. And I get all the information. Now if I run this as a summary report, say okay and preview this, I'm just going to get just the name of the vendor. I won't get each of the invoices listed underneath, but I will see that Nelco has a certain amount there, or a clerk of court has a certain total that's due. I don't get all that detail invoices. I don't see the 3 that was under clerk of county court. I just see the total that's due them. And then lastly, you have that totals only, and the totals only will then also just show me no vendors, but just how much is outstanding for those periods. So it really just depends on how much detail that you want as to how you'll run that. Now, one last thing I will show you is those aging periods and where you set that up. So again, just like we can set up and check that box under customization to include that cash balance here, you also can set up your aging periods right here. So if you want to see 7 to 14 to 30 to 60, whatever those are, you can set these aging periods up right here in your customization. And that will help you with your output. So both of these reports are going to show you what is outstanding and how old the invoices are that are outstanding. And then you're going to know which ones to print and pay based on due dates, based on what the balances are in your checking account, whether or not you have to move monies over or transfer. All of that will give you that information right there on one little report that is very helpful and helps you manage those accounts payable outstanding invoices. So there you have it, an easy way to keep track of all the invoices that are outstanding and the best way to pay them on time.
And that's just one more way that we can help you to worry less
And practice more.